Levia is way better than you think it is. Hello and welcome to the table, and today I'm back with another Sage deck tech video. Today, talking about Levia. And let's dive right into the hero, talking about what Levia is wanting to do. And Levia here is a 4 intellect, 20 health, Shadow Brute hero that says, if a card with 6 or more power has been put into your banished zone during this turn, cards you own lose blood debt during the end phase. What does that mean? Basically, what Levia is wanting to do is play really above rated attacks. Something like a 2 for 7, or even a 1 for 7, and not gonna lie, that's pretty sweet. But there are some downsides to those cards. Most importantly, they have blood debt, meaning that if a card with blood debt is in your banish zone, for each card with blood debt in your banish zone, you're gonna lose a life. So let's say at the end of your turn, you have 5 cards with blood debt in your banish zone. You're gonna lose 5 life. That really sucks. But with Levia, if something with 6 or more power is banished, your stuff does not have blood debt in your banish zone at the end of your turn, which is great. How do you do that? Well, on top of, your attacks being above rate, they have a little bit of a cost. Because in order to play them, generally these above rate attacks force you to have to banish 3 random cards from your graveyard. And if something with 6 or more has been banished, you get some cool effect. Not always the case, but sometimes. So basically, you're using your own cards to turn off the worst kind of parts of the deck, and then you kind of get into an infinite cycle of you needing to banish more cards so you don't take damage from blood debt. And then there's more things blood debt, so you have to make sure that you banish something so you don't lose life because of blood debt. And then you have to make sure it spirals out of control, and you either die in a big explosive glory because this deck is complete and total chaos, or you murder your opponent with 18 damage and 2 cards or something stupid like that. So that's the deck in a nutshell, and that's the hero. So let's talk about what the rest of the deck is wanting to do, starting off with the weapon and the equipment. The weapon being Mandible Claw, an absurdly good card. It's the best brute weapon in the game. It's not really close. So this one-handed 3-power brute weapon, Claw, costs 2 to attack with, and so long as you've discarded a card with 6 or more power this turn, it gets go again. This is a niche card, and it's not always the best because you're banishing a lot more than you are discarding in this deck. However, it can still be really nice on certain turns to allow you to go a little bit wider and deal a little bit more damage. So I think it's a very valuable card in the deck. But there is also some really good pieces of equipment, some good kind of vanilla-ish cards like Blade Beckoner Helm and Blade Beckoner Gauntlets, both of which have guard well, and basically you can either block 2 on a weapon or 1 on a non-weapon attack and 1 on a weapon attack. They're 2 block pieces of equipment. Pretty simple, but they're really good cards, and you should not be underestimating them. They're basically the best vanilla, pieces of equipment in Sage. And they're played in most every Sage deck, or at least 1 or 2 of them are. But then, getting into kind of the class-specific pieces of equipment, you got Barkbone Strapping, which is a really dumb card that blocks for 1 Battle Worn, great start. And on top of that, an instant speed can pop itself, have you roll a 6-sided die, and then gain resources equal to half the number rolled rounded down. So if you roll If you roll a 1, you gain no resources. That sucks, but if you roll something like a 6, you gain 3 resources. So it's the gambler's, game. That's brutes in a nutshell. We all know that. If you've been playing Flesh and Blood for any amount of time, you probably know that. If you don't, brutes like to gamble. This is why. But Barkbone Strapping, it can get you resources. That's certainly what matters. You can run Garland of Spring if you don't want to be gambly, but I like this card better because it can block and it can potentially get you some resources. So, it's cool. But there's also Hooves of the Shadow Beast, which also blocks from 1 Battle Worn. However, when a card with 6 or more power is banished, you can pop it, and then boom, gain an action point. That is absurdly valuable, in my opinion, because, there aren't a ton of ways in this deck to, go super wide. I mean, you have cards with go again in the deck, obviously. However, you don't necessarily have, a giant amount of those kinds of cards. So, having an extra way in emergency situations to get go again can be really nice. Because, yeah, gaining an action point, technically it's not giving a thing go again, is better in a lot of ways. But basically, allowing you to go a little bit wider when you need to can be nice, and that's why the card's in the deck. But getting into the main deck, I got a couple of different categories of cards to talk about. The first one being the beaters, essentially the red cards. And to start things off, let's talk about Boneyard Marauder, a great start to exactly why this deck is complete and total chaos. Because it is a big boy. It is a 1-cost 6 attack that blocks for 3. Absurd start. However, it does have Blood Debt, and as an initial cost to play it, you gotta banish 3 random cards from your graveyard. Now, the Blood Debt and the additional cost, I'm just gonna say that every card, unless I say otherwise, has that ability, and blocks for 3 as well. So if there's anything different, I will say that, but it's a 1 for 6, you gotta banish some cards, shucks, but whatever. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, you can't play any of these on the first turn. This is exactly why the deck likes to go second. Because, you block with your entire hand on the first turn. Boom, 4 cards in the bin. Now, you can play something like a Boneyard Marauder and have 3 cards in your yard to banish away to the Boneyard Marauder's cost. So, that's just something to take note of. But it's a great card. On top of that, you also got some really good stuff like a Hungry Slaughter Beast, which is essentially the same thing as Boneyard Marauder, except it's a 2 for 7. Good in all the same ways. You also got Endless Maw, which is a 3 for 6, worse rate. However, the card with 6 or more power is banished because of its, cost effect, additional cost effect. It gains +3 power. So it's essentially a 3 for 9, which is absurd. Because the thing that's really nice about Levia versus other brute decks is you're not gonna really lose cards from hand, or you're not gambling with stuff in your hand as much. You just need to have stuff in your graveyard, which is easier to do the later the game gets. Like after basically turn 1 or 2, it's really easy to just snowball and not really have to worry too much about getting screwed because you don't have enough cards in hand or whatever, like other brute decks can. Which is why this deck can, be way more explosive and powerful than certain brute decks. But Endless Maw is one of the best cards in this deck because a 3 for 9 is just absurd. It's just absurd. A 3 for 7, we know that it's good, but a 3 for 9, it's just dumb, especially in a 20 life format. But then you also got Dread Screamer. One of the very few ways in this deck to get Go Again, because if a card with 6 or more power is banished to its effect, it gets Go Again. 2 for 6 with Go Again. Pretty strong. Now, it's not a 2 for 7 like Hungry Slaughter Beast, but that Go Again, in a lot of ways, is just always going to be more valuable. Especially if you pitch a blue, play the Dread Screamer, and you have that 1 resource left, and you play something like a Graveling Growl, which is an absurd combo on the second turn, your first turn. If you have some stuff in the banish zone, you play the Graveling Growl, you play the Dread Screamer, then the Graveling Growl, because this 1 for 7 is absurd, and you don't have to banish any cards to play it. However, you can only play it if a card with 6 or more power has been banished this turn. So, the only way you can ever play this guy is if you basically play something like a Dread Screamer first into a Graveling Growl. These two are basically made for each other, but, the card's just insane in the deck. It's just completely insane. Then you also got Writhing Beast Hulk, a 2 for 6 that, if a card with 6 or more power is banished to its effect, it gains Dominate. Late on in the game, y'all know that Dominate's good. If you're new to Sage or new to Flesh and Blood and you don't know why that's good, essentially, your opponent can't block with 1 or more cards from their hand if something has Dominate. So your opponent has 4 cards in their hand. They can block with 1/3 block, or maybe 1/4 block at best. And they got equipment. By the time that you're going to play this, later on in the game, hopefully, your opponent's probably not going to have equipment left. That could be 2 potential damage that leaks through. And if your opponent's at a low life total, or maybe even at 1 life, let's say, that's great for you, because then your opponent just dies. And we love when that happens. We love it when our opponent dies. Which sounds horrible. But, whatever. Shucks. But Writhing Beast Hulk, really good card. Then there's 2 regular brute cards, because as an initial cost to play them, you gotta draw a card, then discard a random card. Normal brute stuff. Like Wild Ride, a 2 for 6, when it attacks, draw and discard a random. And if a card with 6 or more is discarded this way, it gets Go Again. Wild Ride and Pulping are also really good cards in the deck because, Go Again's nice. But on top of that, it gets more stuff into the bin. And that's always good. especially when this deck wants to be aggressive, which it generally wants to be, and it doesn't really want to go too long because it's going to be harder to turn off Blood Debt and then you die if you can't turn off Blood Debt later on in the game. But basically, this allows you to get more stuff into the graveyard without like doing kind of some shenaniganry. So I think these two cards, besides the fact that they do allow you to go wider, are just really good cards. So the only difference between Pulping and Wild Ride is if something on 6 or more is discarded to Pulping, it gets Dominate. And how does it get go again? If it less than 2 non-equipment cards are defending Pulping. So if it doesn't get Dominate, then your opponent can just block with 2 cards, and then boom, it doesn't go like wide at all. But that is nice in a way because it gets 2 cards out of your opponent's hand. But if it gets Dominate, one, that's damage that's likely going to be leaking through, and this gets go again. 2 very, very nice things. 2 very, very nice things. So, Pulping's a really good card. Now, the thing that sucks with Wild Ride and Pulping is they don't block at all, but shucks, whatever. Then the one kind of card that's a bit questionable is Bluster Buff. This card, it's a bit questionable, I know. I think it's a really good card in the deck because it is a 1-cost 6 attack. It's just a generic card. It's just a generic attack action. It blocks for 3, and it's a 1 for 6. But it's not, because when it attacks, it gets -1 power unless you pay 1. So it's a 2 for 6 that blocks for 3. But it's still a 1-cost card that has 6 power. The reason that matters is because 6 is very important in this deck. If you banish the 6, you turn off Blood Debt with Levia, and you generally get other bonuses. If you discard this to something like a Pulping or a Wild Ride, it's a 6. They're going to get go again, basically. But on top of that, Bluster Buff, another reason why it's a good card, is there are turns, a lot of turns with this deck, where you pitch 1 blue, and you play something like a Dread Screamer, you have that 1 resource left, and you need to play something on that 1 resource to get, like, good value. Well, what are you going to do? I mean, yes, you can have something like a Graveling Growl, which is awesome, or, later on in the game, you have something like a Boneyard Marauder, that you can play, a Dread Screamer into a Boneyard Marauder with. That's great. However, if you need something else, Bluster Buff, even though it's a 1 for 5, is still a really good card. On top of that, Graveling Growl does not work, generally speaking, if you play a Pulping or a Wild Ride before it, unless you banish something from your yard somehow with 6 or more power. So, you play something like a Pulping or Wild Ride, you have 1 resource left. You can't play a Graveling Growl. If you have a Boneyard Marauder, great. If you don't, you have the Bluster Buff. It's a niche card. I know that it probably doesn't seem great, but I've personally found quite a bit of success with the card, and it's a one-of, so, take that for what you will, but it's a solid card in the deck, in my opinion. But then getting past that, the reds, the beaters of the deck, the red cards of the deck, let's talk about the pitch cards. The first one being Agile Windup, which there is also a blue copy of. The Agile Windup is a 3 for 6 if it's the yellow that blocks for 2, or a 3 for 5 if it's the blue, it also blocks for 2. The only difference, pitches for 2, pitches for 3. But on top of that, both of these cards also at instant speed can discard themselves and allow you to create an agility token. This is good for 2 reasons. One, that's a 6 with the Agile Windup, not a 6 with the blue Agile Windup, which sucks. But with the yellow Agile Windup, if you discard it, yeah, it's a 6 going into the bin. That can then be banished if you need to off of something like a Writhing Beasthulk or whatever. On top of that, it also gets you an agility token. So if it's the first turn of the game, you block with 3 cards, and then you discard Agile Windup, creating that agility token at the start of your next turn, pops, gives you go again, and it could be way easier for you to go wide, which is really, really nice and really, really dumb. So it's a really good card, is what I'm trying to say. It blocks for 2, shucks, but it's still a really good card. Then you got Graveling Growl and Hungry and Slaughter Beast. They're both identical to the reds, except Hungry and Slaughter Beast, it's a yellow, and it comes in for 6, and Graveling Growl is yellow, and it comes in for 6. Literally, only difference there. There's also Pack Call, which is a 3-cost, 6 attack, 3 block. This card pitches for 2, and when it defends, you reveal the top card of your deck, and if it has 6 or more power, you put it on top, otherwise you put it on bottom. It can be a nice card to defend with because it blocks for 3. That's nice. It can maybe be valuable because of that one defend effect. It's not always going to be, but, you know, it can matter sometimes, and it can get you some knowledge of what's going to potentially be going on your next turn, so whatever, it's decent. And it's a 6 that you can pitch. That's mostly what matters. It's a 6 that you can pitch, and that's good. That's kind of like, that's the bar. It's like, okay, is it a 6 power card? Can I pitch it? Cool, let's put it in the deck. And it's also nice because it can have some niche effects that matter sometimes. So it's a good card. But then there's the other blues, which, yeah, some of them aren't as good. You got the Deadwood Rumbler, which this card's fine because it's a 6 and it's a blue. That's mostly what matters. You're generally never going to play this card. You can read it if you want, but it's a blue 6 power card. That's always what matters. It doesn't block for anything, shucks, but it's a really good card because it's a blue 6. On top of that, you got another blue 6 in Wreck-A-Romp, which is a blue 6 that comes in, or that blocks for 3. Great. Blue block 3 is awesome, and it blocks for 6 on top of that. It's godsend. However, you're generally never going to play this card. And you only have one other blue 6 in the deck, Soul Harvest, which you can also only have one copy of in the deck. That stinks. But it is a blue block 3 that's a 6. That's awesome. And you also generally never going to play this card. But if you do, it can come in for like 10 damage, which is insane. And you can read why that is really quick if you want to look at the card. But Soul Harvest, you play it in the deck like any other blue 6 in the deck because it's a blue 6. And if it blocks for 3, that's even better. So Soul Harvest, yeah, you just always play it. You just always play it. It's typical cards. But then one last thing I kind of want to talk about is the Whiffs. These are cards that still pitch, so it's kind of like still talking about pitch cards. But these cards, they don't have 6 or more power. Now, I've already talked about Blue Agile Windup a little bit. It's just as good as Yellow, in my opinion. It doesn't come in for 6, which really sucks, but it pitches for 3, which I think is fine. That's a fine trade-off, in my opinion. But you also got a couple other cards, like Strongest Survive, a blue block 3, comes in for 5, shucks. It pitches for, or it costs 3 as well to attack with, and if it hits a hero, they discard a card from their hand unless they reveal a card from their hand with power greater than the damage dealt this way. The reason it's in the deck is because of that niche interaction. It's your opponent. It's like, oh, this is just a blue. I don't want to block this. And if they just take a hit, 1, that's 5 damage going at them, and unless they reveal something that has 6 or more power, they still get rid of a card from their hand. So your opponent generally is always going to lose a card from their hand if you attack with this card, and it's a blue block 3. So it's just like, it's an absurdly good card, in my opinion, as a blue in this deck. You also got Endless Maw Blue, which is the same thing as the regular, except it comes in for 4, it pitches for 3, and it blocks for 3. So normal, besides the fact that its power is lower. Dread Screamer, I also have as a blue, and similarly, it's the same thing, except it comes in for 4, and you get to pitch for 3, block for 3. All that's, normal. But lastly, the last blue I want to talk about is Convulsions from the Bellows of Hell. This card is really good. It's a blue block 3, great start. It is, however, not a 6. But it's worth it, because this 2-cost Shadow Brute non-attack action card, has go again, as an additional cost to play, you gotta banish 3 random cards, and if a card with 6 or more power is banished this way, your next attack you play this turn, or next attack action you play this turn, gains +1 power, okay, +1 power shocks, and Dominate. Dominate is absurdly valuable in the late game. This, you're generally not going to play early on. You're going to play it in the late game. And it's in your blues, which I don't know. It's niche tech, basically, in your blues. So if you have something like an Endless Maw, that's going to be coming in for 9. Well, you can pitch, get some maybe other resources, and then Convulsions from the Bellows of Hell first. Now you're coming in for 10, Dominate. That's half your opponent's life, and it has Dominate. Your opponent is either going to go to a very, very low life total, or they're just going to die. Either way, you're a very happy camper. And Convulsions from the Bellows of Hell, it's a good card. It gets a thumbs up in my book. But, getting past the main deck, let's talk about the sideboard. Which, there are really good cards in the sideboard. One of them being Strongest Survive Red. It's the same thing as the blue, except it comes in for 7 and only pitches for 1. The reason that this isn't in the main deck is because I just personally don't think it's very good in Levia if you're going to run it in the main deck. But if you need to slow down some aggressive decks you're playing up against, think of something like Chain or Briar or literally any ninja deck ever, they're not going to have very good defensive, cards. And on top of that, they also run a lot of very small powered attacks. So if this thing just hits and your opponent doesn't block at all, they're just going to discard a card from their hand. And oh, by the way, they also lose 7 life. But if they block, they're going to have to block with half their hand, basically, to ensure that they don't lose a card. So I just think that's really good for you, because it's just like, bro, you're getting so much value off of this card in an aggressive matchup, which is why it's in the sideboard. On top of that, you also got Underworldly Bellow, which I personally think is in our card I'll talk about here in a second. But Unworldly Bellow, if you need to be aggressive, if you just need to kill your opponent as fast as possible, I just personally think this card is awesome. It's the 1-cost Shadow Brute, non-attack action, blocks for 3, adds an additional cost to play, you gotta banish 3 random cards from your yard. Then the next Brute or Shadow attack action card you play, this turn gains +4 power. If you need to kill your opponent quickly, you set up for a little bit with this card, putting it in the arsenal or something like that. You get enough cards in your graveyard, and the second turn that you can attack, you can play this. You can play a big attack, maybe an Endless Maw, that's what you would prefer. Maybe just something like a Hungry and Slaughter Beast. Either way, you're coming in for a giant chunk of damage, and your opponent's either going to have to respect that, or they're going to take a lot of damage, and it's going to be way easier for you to kill them on the following turn. Either way, in a matchup where you just need to hit your opponent harder, I just think this card is so valuable that it has to be in the inventory. But then, you got some good defensive goodies. You got a 1-of Test of Agility, which is a 4-block, 1 at defense, he costs with the attacking hero, the winner creates an agility. It's a good card because you have a lot of big attacks. You're generally going to get that agility token. It blocks for 4. There's a ton of good things about this card. You would replace it with the Bluster buff and the main deck. You just switch these two out. And Test of Agility, it's just a solid 1-of, I think, in the inventory if you need to be a bit more defensive. The game's going to go a little bit longer. On top of that, you also got some Arcane defensibility, like Arcane Polarity, which basically, if you've been dealt Arcane damage this turn, you play it and you gain 4 life. It's absurd. It doesn't cost anything, and you gain 4. You're basically, it's a block 4, but for Arcane decks specifically, it doesn't cost anything. 1-card block 4, Arcane style. It's just way too good in my opinion. And if you play any Sage deck ever, just get a playset of this card. Or if you want to play Sage, just get a playset of this card. Because you could literally play it in any sideboard of a Sage deck, and I would not question you. Because the card's just that good. But you also got some Null Rune gloves for some Arcane Barrier. That's awesome. You also got Even Fold because you don't want to pitch too much. This deck is resource intensive in a lot of ways, so you don't want to have 2 Null Rune pieces in my opinion, but this still prevents 2 arcane damage if, arcane damage would be dealt to you. As a niche effect, we don't care about that. What we care about is if you would be dealt arcane damage, you can blow it up, prevent 2 of it. That's nice. You're basically gaining 2 life in a way. That's all that really matters with this card. But there's also a couple of tech cards I want to talk about briefly. There's only 2 of them. Savage Feast is a card that you could replace with the Bluster buff with. I personally think it's a bit better because Savage Feast, it's also a 1 for 6, but it's always going to be a 1 for 6 and it blocks for 3. So it's very similar to Bluster buff, but it's always a 6. The downside with this card is you got to discard a random card in order to play it. That sucks in my opinion because you need 2 cards in order to be able to play this, and I just think that's too high of a cost. Yes, if a card with 6 or more powers discarded this way, you do get to draw a card. So it's kind of like a snatch in the deck, but I just don't like it because on the turns where you're gonna want to be playing this, it's too awkward in my opinion. You just need too many cards in hand in order for it to work, and it's just awkward because if you have a lot of cards in your hand, I don't know if you're just gonna have the resource lying around unless you play something like an Endless Maw, but even then that doesn't have go again, and it's just Savage Feast is just too awkward in the deck, in my opinion, because it's just, you play on the turns where you'd be playing this, generally speaking, in my opinion. You have a blue, you have a 2-cost go again, and you have a Savage Feast. So, boom, 3 cards right there. And you gotta discard that last card, and yes, you get to draw a card and you can put it in your arsenal. That's great, but I just don't think it's more valuable than the Bluster buff, in my opinion, because I just think that card's more flexible, it's less awkward, and it's just better overall, in my opinion. But if you play Savage Feast in the deck as a one-of over the Bluster buff, I'm not gonna judge you, because I think it's a good card too. I just personally think that Bluster buff is a little bit better. Then, I know, Underworldly Bellow, Unworldly Bellow, I'm not a Levia main, so I don't know everything about the deck. It is a very hard deck. I just think this is better than Howl from Beyond, but I could see why you want to play Howl from Beyond over it. This card's good. It's a 2-cost Shadow action with Go Again, blocks for 2. It has Blood Debt, which is, downside in ways, but you can play it from your Banish Zone, which is great. And the main reason I think it's good in the deck, I personally believe it's good in the deck, and why most people believe it's good, is you can play it, because it reads, the next attack action card you play this turn gains a +3 power. You play it, you gain a +3 power bump to your next attack, basically, and then you get cards in your bin, you put this in the bin, it goes into the bin at the end of the turn, whatever, and then you can banish it away to an attack on the next turn, and you can play it from your Banish Zone again and basically cycle. So you have something you can banish into the Banish Zone and replay, go into the yard, and then be able to banish again. And just kind of have that cycle over and over and over again. And I think that's really good in a slower matchup. However, the one reason I don't think this card's very good is because it's a bit too resource intensive. It's a 2-cost card to gain a +3 power bump. And I'm not saying that's bad, but I'm not saying it's great either. I think it's a bit too expensive for what it gives you. If it costs 1, I think the card would be too broken. And if it costs 2, which I personally think the card should, I think it's just best if it gives like a +4 power bump or something like that. Or maybe even a +5, I don't know. Probably a +4, but it just does too little for what it costs. And it can be a really good value engine, yes, but I just don't think it's good enough in this kind of format, and I think it just costs too much for what it does. I think it needs to be more impactful if you are going to be playing it in Sage in a faster format, even if the game's going to be a bit slower. But that's just my opinion. But with all that aside, I hope you all enjoy this video. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, hit that like button. It's completely free, you won't regret. Check out my other Sage deck tech videos. You can check them out right here. And I hope you all enjoyed this video. Again, it's an absolute blast to record these videos. And I cannot wait to see you all in the next one. And trust me, it's going to be really cool. Because I get to talk about Dragon Mommy. So stay tuned for that wonderful goody goodness.